Hello and welcome. This is the Cole Memo. I'm your host, Cole Preston. Every episode is released in audio, video, and transcript format. To find the transcript, audio, or video version of any episode, please refer to the description of the episode that you're listening to now. Within that description, you can find a link that will take you to our website, which will display the transcript for this episode and the platforms where you can find this episode in audio or video formats. If you're unable to locate the episode description on whichever platform you're listening from, simply take note of the episode number and visit thecolememo.com. From there, you should be able to use the search functionality in the top right-hand corner to find the corresponding episode, and then you'll be able to access the audio, video, and transcript version of that episode. You might also find any links that we reference during the episode so that you might be able to do your own research. If you're not listening to this episode of the Cole Memo on Patreon, then you're listening to this episode later than our patrons. To become a patron, go to thecolememo.com/Patreon. Thank you to our patrons for listening and supporting. It only costs $3 a month to get instant access to all episodes of the Cole Memo as they release. It's a great way to support our show. One of the best ways to support our show is absolutely free. Subscribe to or follow our show. Leave a positive review from wherever you're listening to us from. Favorite this episode, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, or share it with your best friend. Your engagement and support is appreciated. Today is May 29th, 2024. Thank you for listening to the Cole Memo. Well, Bill, thank you so much for sitting down with me today on the Cole Memo. I wanted to give you the space. Why don't you go ahead and tell us who you are and what you do?
My name is Bill Panagiotakopoulos. I am the CEO of Safe Supply. We're a publicly listed company that trades under SPLY in the Canadian Securities Exchange and SSPLF on the OTC.
Awesome. And is that the way that somebody would be able to support Safe Supply through the Canadian Stock Exchange, or are there other avenues?
Well, it was a lot of work to take this idea and this movement to the capital markets. A lot of scrutiny, a lot of questions. Yeah, absolutely. Just like GameStop, just like a lot of these other companies, one of the best ways to support the venture market that's trying to bridge the gap between amazing policy that's coming out and ultimately a business that should exist.
Awesome. And folks, we'll have the link to safesupply.com, which includes the ticker and investment information if that's what you're looking for. It also includes, I'm displaying it on my screen right now. It also includes social media so that you can get connected online and other information so that you can learn more and ultimately get involved. And I think that's likely what we'll be talking about today. So maybe we'll wrap back around to that idea of getting involved. I think people are already sort of involved by turning on and tuning into this episode. So good start, right? Um, if you don't mind telling me, how did you find yourself where you are today? I'd love to hear that story.
So Cole, I started very conservative beginnings. I steered clear of a lot of the more risky activities when I was young in life. Then I went on to study biology at York University. Was fascinated by how the human body actually works. Got into venture investing really early on and started to see I guess the light turning on moment for me was cannabis. Here's something that I've been taught that is the worst thing in the world. You cannot touch it. It's awful. And after educating myself on it, it's like, hold on a sec. How does that make any sense at all? You're talking about a plant here that's been, at our fingertips literally for millennia. And now I'm being told by somebody that, oh, in the last, 100 years or so, it's not a good thing. Okay, I'm not buying it. But really, when I saw the evidence of people that were suffering with, cancers and some other terminal diseases, and saw just the relief, just the power of this, just kind of woke me up and said, well, gee, what are we doing here? Like, we're kind of abusing humanity by taking out all these amazing, these incredible substances that we've been enjoying and helping us evolve. I don't know a rock band here that hasn't used, some sort of substance and I'm talking about the big ones. I don't know of any of the artists that don't use some kind of escape, some kind of a mind accelerating substance to make them more creative, more relaxed, more of what they should be. And that's when I got into cannabis, and I was one of the first guys to invest in and open up a cannabis company back in 2012 when cannabis started to become a thing. And I was one of the first companies to go public and actually build a facility, one of the first companies to get a federal license in Canada, one of the first companies to do medical research, one of the first companies to get medical sales, one of the first companies to get our actual growing and processing facility, up and running. And it was a trip. I mean, here I am, I'm a pioneer in cannabis. And, up and until university, I was definitely not even allowed to go near it, smell it, look at it, because it was the devil's lettuce. It was an awful thing. It's going to corrupt me. It's going to this me. It's going to that me. And here I am. I have SKUs going out all across the country. So that was exciting for me. I was proud of that moment. And, on the heels of that, I went into the psychedelic trades and into that market. I put together some IP. I patented a couple of compounds using a psilocybin to treat fibromyalgia and to treat IBS. And, I truly believe in that. I think that psilocybin and, ketamine and all those amazing compounds that, again, you're not allowed to touch, you're not allowed to use, but are some of the most incredible, I'm going to say medicines, even though I'm not qualified to say that, we'll make that clear, out there. So here I go, I get kickstarted into cannabis. I've grown more cannabis plants than most people you'll ever meet, and I'm proud of that. I've gotten more poundage out of cannabis than most people, legally, federally, and everything. I've advised a lot of companies. I've actually advised some countries on their cannabis regime, which was exciting for me in 2017, 2018. One of the first people to really look at the psychedelics and their power and their value. And then I felt, what? It's time. British Columbia up here in Canada decriminalized all drugs. And when I was reading up and being a part of that release and that moment, I knew that there's going to be a big movement that's going to come. People are going to get behind this. The people are going to go against it. How do I position myself, my friends, my investors, my circle to help support that and also monetize that? Because the reality is that you gotta build something into a business, whether it's renewable energy or whether it's cannabis. If it doesn't have a taxable component to it, it's not going to work. That's just the reality of it. And I've become a little bit of a capitalist to be able to see that. So we got together, we put Safe Supply company into the capital markets, which took a really long time with a lot of objections, a lot of pushback, a lot of stalls, and a lot of delays. But we finally got there. We started trading on the Canadian Securities Exchange under SPLY. And then we made it to the Frankfurt Exchange, which was an amazing feat. And then onto the OTC. And here we are, looking at the world and seeing what amazing things are coming in this new horizon.
Awesome. Well, Bill, you covered a lot of bases. I want to try to see if I can't uh, dig deeper in some of the things that you mentioned. Um, I guess one of the last things you mentioned, I'm just curious. I think I know what you meant because I've heard other advocates and activists say the same thing, but I'm just curious if you could unpack it. If I heard you correctly, you said that if there's not a taxable component to it or of it, it's not going to work. Can you just tell our listeners like what you meant by that?
Look, here in North America, we regulate eggs, cheese, milk. We regulate cannabis, obviously. We regulate tobacco. We regulate alcohol. In Canada, we regulate suicide. We regulate everything, and that's the government's way of allowing things to move forward. If there's no regulation on drugs, on cocaine, on ecstasy, on fentanyl, on all this stuff that's out there, it's not going to go. And the regulations need to be enforced. So that means that in cannabis, there's regulations and there's a taxable component to it so that they can enforce that, in fact, your facility is licensed and operating clean and, with respect to what the person is going to consume, it's not going to hurt them. Well, if you go to the third wave now and you say, okay, well, we believe that, MDMA and ecstasy and cocaine should be legalized, or legalized to a point where you can actually go and get a pure gram of cocaine or a pure ecstasy. Well, there's going to be oversight needed. That's going to require capital. They're not going to pull resources from, alcohol and tobacco, or from cannabis, or from the school fund, or from the highways fund to go and fund this. There has to be a taxable
Right.
component.
So you're
Yeah.
saying the taxes would be used to make sure that it's a well-regulated product.
Well regulated, and also help for people that have gone to the addiction side. So
Fair. Yeah.
if there's a mechanism where the government can actually bring in resources in the form of taxes or duties or however they want to do it, now they can not only oversee it, but also help people. And by the way, we regulate gambling. Online gambling was illegal up until a couple of years ago. Now it's
And there are
regulated.
hotlines you can call if you've got a problem, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes. And of course, that comes from the revenue that the taxation of this activity yields.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you for diving into that. And um, if I have any other thoughts come up on that, but one of the points that you had made at the beginning that you kind of just touched on is that you hesitated to call them medicines. I think it'd be easier for us to just everybody agrees they're drugs. And one thing that I think some people have yet to kind of get in their mind is that drugs are tools that can be misused or abused or used properly. Like there, it may be even another option. I don't know. But just to my point, with a tool, let's say with a hammer, I'm hammering a nail in. If I accidentally hit my thumb, you could argue that one could argue that I misused the hammer by not making sure it's a common mistake, but I misused it. I should have hit the nail, not my thumb, right? I could abuse a hammer by hitting you in the stomach with a hammer, right? That's not the proper use of a hammer, right? So again, back to the point, and I think this is a good place to start because some people get really, and I'm glad that you mentioned, the taxing component isn't only for regulation, but also like if people get help or need help, because that's one of, I think, the number one concerns when this topic comes up is not only do people not understand that drugs are tools that can be misused or abused, but also that like just because we're saying safe supply and that drugs shouldn't be illegal doesn't also mean that we're not here to help you, to support you. In fact, that's exactly what safe supply is all about.
Absolutely. I agree. There you go. And with anything out there, I think most people are past should this be accessible or not, because there's no argument. I mean, any 15-year-old in any major city and anywhere in North America can access literally any drug they want. Like, it's not to say that, well, we need to make it illegal. We're all past that. The war on drugs didn't work. We tried. It was an amazing attempt. It was a boondoggle of a wasted amount of money, but they tried to say, hey, just say no and don't do drugs and all the rest of it. Yet every single day, people are getting whatever drugs they want, as often as they want. The only difference is that society has pushed them to the underworld, where people that are sadly too often opportunistic and have decided to push and maybe contaminate and maybe do some nefarious things to it, instead of saying, hey, look, as a society, I think we've been using drugs since the beginning. One can argue that it helped us evolve. One can argue that it helped us be more creative and all the amazing things that some of these drugs do. But okay, so now for the last 100 years or so, we've said, no, you can't. It's bad. It's illegal. But, Cole, you can buy drugs. They just come from a factory. So
Right.
don't cannabis, don't use ecstasy, don't use cocaine. But you know what? We'll flood the market with all these other versions of it, the methamphetamines, the Adderalls, quite literally everything else. So a logical person would say, hold on a sec. So this war on drugs that we spend billions of dollars of taxpayer money on every single year, Oh, by the way, we also spend billions of dollars on healthcare and addiction and everything else because people are getting duped into, instead of doing cocaine, it's cocaine and fentanyl, it's cocaine and xylazine, it's cocaine and a little bit of something else. Now we're seeing fentanyl in weed and all the rest of it. And some people that, hey, listen, I want to go out, let's say, and party on a weekend and have ecstasy. I don't want to have ecstasy with a little bit of fentanyl because that's going to make me an addict. So again, we're spending billions on the war on drugs. Doesn't work. We're spending billions on healthcare from people that, in large part, are getting tricked into doing things that they don't want to be doing and at levels they shouldn't be doing it at with no education. So me as a taxpayer in the middle would argue that, guys, this doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Do you want to stop the illegal sale of anything like alcohol? Make it legal, regulated, clean, legal. I don't think there's anybody in this world that wants to go and find somebody on the street unregulated and buy ecstasy or cocaine if they can go to a store where it's completely overseen, regulated, clean, legal.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, where so with Oregon, for example, Oregon kind of reversed course. Where do you stand on that topic? Do you think they're I know it's a pretty large topic, but where do you stand on that, being that they did decriminalize all drugs, like I think you said British Columbia did, but I believe they've recently reinstituted some criminal penalties.
Well, what they did is they went, it's a half measure. Okay, so you just decriminalized. Great. What have you done other than giving a payday and a bonanza for all the drug dealers? What did you do? Did you offer them another source? Hey, did you maybe say, well, look, we'll decriminalize at home or maybe even overseen or maybe prescription use so people aren't getting high and freaked out in the middle of public parks or on the side of the road? No, I think doing hard anything, whether it's drinking a lot or doing hard drugs, shouldn't be done in the public. Shouldn't be allowed to be done on the street. So you guys decrimmed in a way that was reckless, and you probably potentially hurt a lot of people. Now, Portugal decriminalized 20 years ago. Their model seems to kind of work, but it was a lot smaller population, a lot. I think back then it was just easier to manage, a lot of stigma and all the rest of it. But even in BC, okay, well, if you're going to decriminalize, put up some guardrails, give people options. Don't just decriminalize and say, have fun. Let's see where the dust settles. I think that was again, it was just a half measure. It needed to be thought out a little bit further. More support and more guardrails needed to be put in place to actually see the benefits of what decriminalizing can do.
Right. So as far as support, they had drug rehabilitation support, I think, which was good, like you had mentioned earlier. But I think what I had heard some of the problem is that people weren't seeking it out. So their idea is that by forcing them to seek it out, which I just tend to disagree with, because I feel like if somebody doesn't want help, sometimes forcing them into that doesn't always work. But I've heard anecdotal reports that, sometimes people can't get out of a cycle, and then being forced out of it is the best way. I don't know where to land on that, but I guess what I wanted to ask you, again, and I know this is kind of a big topic, but like what are some other guardrails or other ways to deal with it? I think notably one thing that was lacking in Oregon was the concept of safe supply. As you just said, it was decriminalized, but there was no place to get these drugs, meaning that people could be consuming enormous unmeasured quantities of these drugs. Again, though, the question is, what are some of the guardrails that you think maybe would have made it stay the course and not get derailed?
I think if we take a step back and look at who are the vulnerable people, there's a lot of levels of addiction. There's a lot of levels of drug use. I would like to, just because I'm not qualified to focus on another group, I would like to focus on um, the soft user, the first user, the not the habitual everyday addict that has a very, very difficult case to treat. I want to talk about the college kids that are going out trying stuff for the first time, or maybe they do it once or twice a year. I want to go to the electrician, the plumber, the lawyer, the doctor, the teacher who, you know what, their mortgage has now tripled. They can't sleep, and they're going to start using something to help them, whether it's cannabis, cocaine, whether it's ecstasy, whether it's psilocybin. They need some relief, or somebody's trying to celebrate. Somebody's trying to, celebrate a milestone, as we saw up here with some college kids that ended up dying. Give them an option. You're not going to have a one size fits all. Give them an option. If I want to use cocaine or ecstasy, and I have the ability to go and get a prescription and say, speak to a professional and say, look, I want to kick this habit, or I'm going to continue using this. I don't want to go to the street because I don't know what I'm getting, and I don't want to play Russian roulette, and I don't want to get addicted to fentanyl. I certainly don't want to die from fentanyl. I'm not a bad guy. This is just advice that I have. Help. Well, now you're talking to a professional. They can help you. They can guide you. They're not going to force you one way or another. But what I think is important for us as a society, I don't want to say government, I want to say us as a society, which includes government and policing and everything, is to be there for one another. You know what? Somebody has somebody's using cocaine. Okay, you're using cocaine. How do we help you? First of all, don't send you to somebody who's probably going to trick you, or there's a chance they can trick you. And number one, and number two, guys, I want to go to somebody who I can actually talk to. I want to talk to a doctor. I want to talk to a psychiatrist. I want to talk to somebody and say, hey, listen, you know what? I've got a family. I've got a good job. This is something that I'm dealing with right now. Can I get help? Or you know what? I don't want help. I just want to make sure that I don't die. That, as a society, we should give people that right. And then we can want to judge or not judge what the person's doing, if it's right or if it's wrong. First of all, let's get them out of the streets. Let's get them out of the alleys where they don't know what they're getting, how they're going to get it, and what the outcome is going to be. Because there's a lot of people, I think, that are in these encampments that just started innocently. They were doing their Molly, they were rolling ecstasy when they went out, they were celebrating, or they were escaping, whatever the case is, between getting, nudged into maybe something harder and harder. And now they find themselves without a family, without a home, without a job. That's where I would start. And that's what I mean by guardrails. Pick the segments that you can help maybe a little bit easier than the other segments, and start from there, and then just start chipping away at it.
That is a good point because, I've heard stories like I can't think of it now, and I don't, I'd rather not Google it, but folks can try to with this description just because it's kind of a sad story. But it's this idea of a kid, believe I read about, who was feeling anxiety about something coming up in his life. He asked one of his friends for a Xanax pill. They gave it to him. He thought it was a Xanax pill. You Google it, it looks like a Xanax pill. But what he didn't know was that it was pressed by somebody who, you know, doesn't make Xanax, and there happened to be fentanyl in it. And that's a sad story because, as you said, this is a person that just wanted some temporary relief from
Yep.
anxiety, and they will never breathe again.
I have another story if I can tell.
Absolutely.
Up here in Toronto, 4 girls just passed their bar, which means they were becoming lawyers. They went out to party. They got ecstasy. That night, one of them died from fentanyl overdose. One of them was in, I think two of them were in the hospital. One of them, I think, went into a coma, and one of them didn't have any. And these are just college grads that passed the bar. They wanted to celebrate. They wanted to use, a drug to do it, which a lot of people do. And they weren't looking to go on fentanyl. They weren't looking to die. They weren't desperate. They were just kids that were trying to celebrate. That kills me. That's somebody's daughter, sister. That's somebody's, that's somebody's family. All this could have been prevented.
Right. And what sucks is there are these half measures, and I want to be clear that I'm not denigrating these options by calling them half measures, but there are options where you can get your drugs tested. But of course, you and I know the problem is, and maybe even people know, there's this very popular graphic online where it shows like a dime and how small of a speck of fentanyl will kill you. And I guess my point is, I'm not saying drug testing isn't like a good start, a good responsible step to take. It's unfortunate that it's even needed, and it's very unfortunate that it's possibly not effective due to the concentration of fentanyl, right?
Yeah. And that brings us to a really good point here, that Safe Supply has invested in a company called Safety Strips, safetystrips.com. And what they're doing is bringing fentanyl test strips, xylazine test strips, the date rape drug G test strips. They're addressing the fundamental problems with drugs out there with a test strip. And what a lot of people don't know is that up and until last August, those strips were drug paraphernalia, the fentanyl and the xylazine. They were drug paraphernalia in the US. So if you got caught with a fentanyl test strip, that was a felony charge. That was a felony charge. You'd go to 2 years to jail. Like
Wow.
it's bananas that something like that would even exist.
Right.
Now they've repealed that, I think, in almost all the states. This company is poised to enter into a multi-billion-dollar market because it's a land grab. And they're coming out, I understand from, we invested in them a couple of months ago, and they're talking to Walgreens and CVS and all the rest of it. And from what I've been told is they've all come back and said, yes, we need this, we want this. Put this on our shelves, we'll push it. This is the right thing to do. And up and until a couple of months ago, we found out that now we're seeing fentanyl in weed. Well, that's terrifying. Imagine going to relax with a joint, smoking it, and finding yourself either addicted to fentanyl or dead. Like it's absolutely crazy that this happens. And at Safe Supply, what we do is we go and find those companies out there that are pushing the envelope and getting ahead of it. One of the other companies we're looking at right now is an AI mental health and addiction app, where you can get onto it. It's an app, it's an avatar, and you can talk to it and get some help that most people need. A lot of people don't want to go and see a doctor. A lot of people don't want to go and see a psychiatrist. There's a cost to it that is prohibitive. There's a stigma to it. A lot of people want to text their AI buddy, I call them, and say, hey, look, you know what? I'm thinking of this and this, and getting some good positive feedback, because I don't think we're getting enough of that in our society.
Yeah. Where just to peel the page back a little bit and take us to a slightly separate topic, but you did bring up cannabis, so I guess it's kind of related. Uh, you said you were one of the first companies to sell cannabis in 2012. What was that, in like an adult use state or something, or in Canada?
No, the company started in 2000 and end of 2012, 2013.
Hmm.
Um, we were the first purchase order for the OCS, which is the Ontario Cannabis Store
Cool.
here in Canada. And that was back in 2018, April, I think, 20th. Yeah, April 20th. And that's when it was legalized here for recreational use. Before that, we were selling into the medical market too. So all the cannabis sales that I was doing was through a publicly traded company, was during the whole cannabis boom. And like I said, we were one of the first out there. And by the way, back then, when I wanted to take the company public and find investors and VCs and all the rest of it, 9 out of 10 people asked me to leave their office. I was told I was crazy. I was told I was going to go to jail. I was told you're going to ruin your name. I was told some pretty aggressive things, and then that became one of the biggest financial trades of our economy, right? And now you look at it, and in Canada alone, we have $6 billion a year worth of legal cannabis sales. That's a big business for Canada.
Yeah.
I'm sure New York State does it in an afternoon, but for Canada, it's big.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, with cannabis legalization, first of all, like there's been this idea, like you say, of tax and regulate, and in many states it's taken different forms, right? So I don't know how familiar you are with the evolution of cannabis in the United States, but you first started off with California, and states like that. I believe Maine legalized and Michigan legalized back in the early 2000s, and it was mostly like caregiver, home
Mhm.
grower markets. And in about 2012, 2013, 2014, the Cole memo was issued, which is not just a cheesy reference to my name. It was a federal policy, which kind of a lot of cannabis CEOs that have been on my show have credited to like changing the game and ushering in this new era of compliance focused, highly regulated, limited licensed cannabis. And that's the part that I wanted to ask you about. What do you think about the idea of limiting the number of licenses? I get it. I just want to preface before I turn it over to you. I get it from an economic standpoint. I get why it's advantageous to like have a certain segment of the market share that is literally like that it belongs to you. I totally understand that and why, one that is participating in a market would want there to be limited licenses. But at least with the case of cannabis, it seems like, you know, again, a lot of new states are kind of leaning into the idea that there shouldn't be an unlimited number of licenses issued. There should be a limited number of licenses. What say you, Bill, on that just concept? I'm curious.
So cool. As the capitalist, limit it. I'll find my way to the top and I'll do well. And in Canada, it was like that. As a person, as a citizen, I say you can't limit opportunity. Everybody should have access to the opportunity. But I will say this though, in Canada, and I watched it firsthand, there was limited licenses and there was an industry building. As soon as they went to mass licensing, literally micro growers and all the rest of it, there's so many levels of it. The bottom fell out of the whole industry. Because now, how do you invest, 4, 5, 25, $35 million into a facility when there's literally no guardrails to make sure that you can build on that? Because it takes years to recoup and be able to be to sustain that sort of thing. So I saw again, I don't ever want to limit opportunity out there for anybody, certainly not myself. But I understand why they would want to limit and not make it a free for all, because it's also easier for them to oversee and manage that new opportunity.
Yeah, that last part I totally get because, like, here in Illinois, for example, there are so few that it's got to make regulating it pretty easy versus you mentioned New York a bit ago. In New York, there are so many shops that are just operating under the guise of legality that the regulators can't tell which are and which aren't. And they actually claim that most aren't legal stores.
Wow.
Um, so,
And
you
that's a
know,
problem. That's a problem. The government, look, the people, again, I don't like saying the government, the people want this out there in some capacity under control.
yeah,
You don't want to hurt people. So if you're telling me now there's 10 shops open in a state, 5 of them are not legally regulated, which means that there's no control, which means that there's risk, but the 5 are, no, you got to reward the 5 that are regulated and playing, are coloring within the lines, because that's what we're doing this for, right? We're doing it so that we get rid of that, the criminal element that could potentially bring harm and bring risk into the people that want to consume.
yeah. I guess I'm curious. I totally get what you're saying. And actually, that's what most people tell me. And even our regulators, I've had Illinois regulators on the show, and they say that the reason we limit licenses is because if you look at states like Michigan, people go out of business, the prices fall to the bottom, and that's really tough. Um, but it's like, I guess what I'm asking is what makes cannabis different than restaurants, which we like accept that, at least in America, we seem to accept that 80% of restaurants go out of business within the first 5 years. But we never, I know I'm appealing to the pitch you said earlier, but nobody's insisting we limit those licenses. In fact, they're like, yeah, open a business, you know?
Yeah, it's true. I think the health regulations and requirements for somebody that's going to take something and combust it and inhale it, given all the people that have risk factors around that, that is different than your restaurant inspector coming through. I've seen some restaurants that have passed inspection that I'll never eat in.
Yeah.
That bar is really, really low. If I'm immunocompromised, if I have an issue, if I have some mental issues and stuff, I should be This is, I think, on just a little bit higher of a level to say, I'm going to consume something, whether it's in a edible form, or I'm going to burn it and inhale it, or I'm going to vape it. I need to have guardrails because that stuff can really cause damage. I mean, when you look at in Ontario, in Canada here, they did a study years back and they found that 69% of all street grown or sold weed had some toxic level of herbicide, pesticide, mold, mildew, sulfur on it, because the reality is a lot of the people that are growing the bud, and I've seen a lot of these people, if you're not regulated where they're testing on the parts per billion as they do up here, which I think is too much, but that's another discussion. Some of these guys are spraying, pesticide on it that you have to wear a hazmat suit to spray it on, and its half-life is 7, 10, 12 days. Well, a lot of these people are spraying it 2 days before they're cutting down, and then within that week it's going out. Well, somebody's now taking something that should be weeks untouched, burning it and inhaling it. That's got to cause damage. That can't be good for you.
Yeah.
So my point to all this is that restaurant, you might get sick, you might vomit. When you're talking about drugs, and cannabis is a drug that you're going to consume, it should have a higher standard, which would mean that the amount of licenses out there, because you have to manage them way more stringently, should be less.
Yeah. It just seems like those ideas, like, uh, they almost conflict with each other. You know what I mean? Where it's like, I get what you're saying. It's as far as regulating and controlling, but it's like the idea that, at least in Illinois, the way we've seen the primary enforcement mechanism for our license limitations, and it seems like it's the same in other states, where they use the criminal law to, like, so it's not just like a business infraction. Like when I open up a restaurant and I don't have a food license or whatever, like I don't get the impression that I get thrown in a cage. You know what I mean? But that's what happens in Illinois, at least. And I feel like it causes people to not even want to play by the rules, especially if they don't have a route to.
Yeah.
But it's like I say, it's a weird balancing game. And I just, I guess my thought here is like, within the context of cannabis, and I'll even lump in mushrooms here because I know other drugs it gets a little bit more complicated. It just seems like it's like organic, don't panic. And I'm not neglecting what you said about the pesticides. And even you mentioned earlier fentanyl. So maybe I'm being a little bit, I don't want to say ignorant, but maybe I'm being a little bit too optimistic because, as you said earlier, sometimes these people that are selling many different drugs, fentanyl can get like sprinkled, I guess, on the weed. I don't think anybody's purposefully adding fentanyl to weed. I think that people that aren't
Yeah.
complying with regulations might just mix their supplies accidentally. And so I get those concerns and everything. Maybe I'm being too optimistic. I guess the thought I'm trying to work through is like, you started with eggs and milk and everything earlier, and I actually was talking to a researcher at the University of Illinois recently, and they were like, because kind of about this topic, and they're like, Cole, a black market still exists for eggs and milk.
Yeah. Yeah. But
And I was
hey,
like,
listen, try selling an egg without a license.
true.
It's not a, hey, don't do that. It's enforced.
Oh,
Eh,
really?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. People can get sick.
Yeah, yeah.
There's salmonella, and especially with milk, there's all kinds of issues if it's not pasteurized and this and that. But I will say this, when I first started selling up here in Canada, they only opened up 23 stores in all of
Hmm.
Ontario. We have
Yeah.
so alcohol sales and beer sales are done through the province here.
Uh-huh.
We had 8,000 LCBOs and brewers retail that sold all the alcohol, 8,000. And they said, well, 26 cannabis stores should be great.
And I just wanted to show Ontario. Ontario is a lot bigger than I thought it was. Holy crap. It takes a
It
long
is.
time to drive, like from here. I've got my mouse down here. It takes a long time to drive because I've driven here. So I'm sure that Ontario looks like it's mountainous too, maybe.
No, it's all flat.
Oh, it
But
is.
the thing is, which is interesting, almost all of the population, you see where Toronto is? So if you draw a line from Minneapolis right over to Montreal, That is almost all the population of Ontario. It's like 12 million people.
Oh,
Yeah, from Montreal to Minneapolis. So I mean, sorry, from Montreal to Michigan.
oh,
You see
okay.
what I'm saying?
Yep.
Right there. Everybody's right down there in the south. We're actually 30%. We are more south than 30% of all the continental United States there. So we enjoy some nice weather. But the truth is that they messed it up at the beginning too. They really over tightened the regs. They only opened up, 24 stores. It was a nightmare. And what that did is it proliferated all the black market shops to open because the stigma had been lifted.
Right.
Were looking for weed, you couldn't find, or the to get into one of these shops was impossible. So everybody in the black market just opened up shops everywhere, and they were busy from day one. So there's somewhere in the middle there. I think they overdid at the beginning in Ontario, and then they just let it open to everybody, which of course caused the price to collapse, which caused I think at least half of them are bankrupt now. So
Yeah.
there's got to be a medium in there. But again, new industry in the regulated world, they're going to have some hurdles. They're going to have some bumps and bruises along the way. They're doing the right thing by bringing it out and allowing people access, which is great. Let's just figure it out. And there's a lot of special interest groups that are lobbying the crap out of government, right? And saying, hey, less is better. Less is better. And
Yeah.
then other people saying, open it up, open it up.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that that'll be the well, before I ask that question, I wanted to just quickly drill down on something else you said that I thought would be interesting because it's something we can relate to. And you were like, we don't have to devote much time to it, but just to round out your point, you said the parts per billion might be too strict in Canada. We have the same thing in Illinois. Can I just ask, is it is it causing producers to basically have to remediate all their products?
The
Yeah,
most. There's very few people that can grow something without some microbe getting on there. It's almost
yeah,
impossible. And what happens is people actually go, and what we had to do is irradiate the
right.
weed, which is
Now
awful.
in Canada, you have to label your product if you do that, right? I don't think in America you do.
Not yet. And
Oh,
then
not
there's
yet.
also, yeah, there's also another technology called e-blast, I think. And it's another form of sterilization, which is less, I guess, disruptive to the plant. But I mean, come on, guys, like, let's be realistic. This is an agricultural product at the end of the day. Sterilizing it, I don't think is the answer because I think you're losing a lot of the amazing stuff that's in the plant by putting it through that process.
I agree with you because I grow my own and I am not a genius by any stretch, but every crop that I've ever grown has been better than anything that I've ever tried from a store. And again, I don't color myself to be a genius at all. And so, yeah, I agree with you that it happens, but to just briefly play the other side of it, to your point, with milk and everything else, we pasteurize everything. So maybe with massive industrial cannabis, that is the standard,
Yeah,
and
sadly.
maybe with craft cannabis, that's where you get the experience, what we're talking about. But anyways, um, to break off from cannabis and just to get back to the overall topic of drug policy in general, do you think that if we were to see safe supply and concepts like that take over, for example, right now in Illinois, we're pushing to deschedule and regulate psilocybin, and we're definitely, it seems, talking about a limited license structure. And I guess my question is, do you think that's the future, for at least like the brief future, for all drug policy, like if we're rolling out like a safe supply type option, like regulated cannabis or regulated psilocybin?
That's the hope. That's the hope. The dream is to stop the hundreds of billions of dollars globally that flows into parts of the world that shouldn't be getting this money and staying within the country or the state or the county and helping the people that are there create jobs, create an industry, and like I said earlier, people have demonstrated that they're creative and they'll find what they want. Let's make it clean for them and reap the rewards of it and be able to help people along that journey, right? The guy that's trying cannabis or trying ecstasy or whatever, you want to be with them on their journey as a society and say, we're here for you. What do you want? This is what you want to do? Here. Oh, you want help? Here. Oh, you want a different option? Here. You know, you want to be supportive. You don't want to have people feel like what they're doing is evil, what they're doing is wrong, because, you know, who's to say? I have somebody in my office who drinks like 6, 7 coffees a day. I'd call that excessive. And I think it alters them as a person. That's their choice, you know? That's kind of a weird example, but you know what I'm saying, right? There should be, you know, as a society, we should be helping people as opposed to, you know, alienating them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious with regard to the future. Um, how exactly do you position yourself like as an entity, or have you yet? Like, is it kind of waiting on a proposal to roll out? And do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah, we're actively looking right now in different verticals that we see that there is going to be revenue, which is important because again, we're a business. So the med tech, the health testing business is very attractive to us. It's growing exponentially. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry with a tremendous land grab there. So we're really honing in on that vertical, and also the AI with helping people. We don't know when and if, or sorry, when for sure it's going to happen. There's going to be a safe supply available to people in shops. And we're always watching for that, and we're always cognizant of when that's going to come and want to be on top of it. But we can't pin ourselves as a company to wait for that policy, because everything that we do at Safe Supply is under federal law. If it's not federally legal, we cannot touch it. We can't go near it. So those are the two areas that we're finding most interesting right now. And then they put us in a good position to be able to, when the policy changes, be able to segue back into that sector of the industry and really be able to make waves in it.
Absolutely. And, forgive me for harping on the topic of licensing so much, but it is just a really interesting topic. And if I could just explain to you why I find it so interesting, is because some of the cannabis CEOs that I've had on my show refer to it as cannabis 2.0. Some refer to it as prohibition 2.0, which I think is a little bit on the nose, because it's like, in my opinion, it's like an underhanded way of saying that we will use the law to kind of enforce or create a regulatory moat. And maybe those individuals disagree with me, on that. But I'm just curious, what do you think, given that that is the future? What is, do we have an answer right now? Because in Oregon, right, and in BC, we're saying individuals should not be charged for using or possessing drugs, and then it seems like we're neglecting like the idea of licensed activity. All of a sudden, you're a bad person if you're doing unlicensed activity. What do you think the answer is to that?
Look, they're gonna. I wish I had one. I'd know. I'd have the crystal ball, but
The
the
billion-dollar
reality,
question.
if I could sell cocaine right now in Oregon or BC, I'd be a multi-billion dollar company, and really helping people and I think saving lives. Um, there's a political war at this. There's, you know, the old stance of, you know, drugs are bad, just no to drugs and we'll be okay. And then there's the new guy saying, hey, no, like let's do this. It's going to be fought on a political front. We're going to be ready one way or another. We're going to go into the soft areas of this industry and amass our book and our clientele and our base of people that are actual users, make a business of it. And when it happens that they say, hey, you know what, we actually need to have clean and safe supply, we already have a lab that has the dealer's license to be able to import coca leaves and cocaine and ecstasy and everything else. We're ready to go. In the meantime, though, we got to capitalize and be good stewards of capital, and be respectful to our shareholders and make sure that we're honoring their commitment to us and our commitment to them. But man, I tell you, the day they say that, yeah, we need to start selling MDMA legally, like, by the way, they have in Australia. So Australia's on the forefront of all of this. But as soon as in North America they say go, we'll be ready, and we can move faster than anybody because we've made all the relevant, I guess, inroads to the places, the countries that are actually producing the products, the UN sanctioned products, which is again one of the key things here. It's not going to be just, oh, hey, look, that we're allowed to
Right.
sell cocaine. I know where to get some of that. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be a government overseen UN sanctioned transaction that's going to happen. And interestingly enough, legal cocaine for medical use right now is about $4 billion a year. So there's an actual real legitimate business for legal cocaine within the surgical and medical world. The illegal side of it is over $130 billion. That's just crazy to me. Governments are looking at, listen, there's no government in the world that's looking at that number and not just drooling and saying, holy crap, we need a piece of that, because it's happening anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my last question on licensing, and then I want to just open it up. I've got a few just brief questions to close. What do you think about it sounds like man to man we agree on the idea of and even like from an economic standpoint, we agree why people push for limited licensing. So on both bases, we on one hand we're like man to man, we're like we shouldn't limit anybody from getting in. But on the other base, for like economically, we understand why one would be, why one would want to push for that. I'm curious, and maybe you don't expect this one. What do you think about the idea of limiting the number of licenses any individual entity can have? Because that's actually one license
A
limit that
100%.
yeah,
I saw that massacre up here where the government opened up for a brief moment the ability to open up sister licenses. These multi-billion-dollar corporations rolled up. No, that's not fair. That's not fair. If you have a license and you're a good operator and you need to expand your business, we'll find a way to accommodate it. But just because you were first in doesn't give you a monopoly, or not, sorry, it would be an oligopoly at that point.
right,
Come on.
right,
Come on, you have your license, work it. Let's say your facility isn't big enough. That was our case. You need to either move the whole facility or expand. Sure, let's find a concession. But no, you don't get one. Like you're not Purdue. We're not redoing that nightmare again, are we? No. Well, let's open it up. Competition is good. Just controlled competition, I think, might be a little bit better.
fair. Well,
And again, oh, sorry. I lived all of this real time in cannabis up here in Canada, the limited licenses and what that meant, the wide open and what that meant, the one guy getting 10 different facilities, the other guy not being able to even license one. I lived all that up here. It's, yeah, oh, yeah, sometimes very painful.
yeah. Well, I want to thank our listeners if you're still listening at this point. And what I want to ask, aside from capital, which we mentioned at the beginning of the show, and investments, how would like just a normal person that might be still listening right now help with kind of the overall mission that you're doing?
I just find good companies like us. There's not many that are, trying to bridge good policy with business, because if you don't, I mean, then it doesn't exist. Cannabis only worked because the reality is the business made sense, right? People with come in with money, government's not going to put up the money. So you got to find companies that are like us that go out there, like Safety Strip's an amazing company. Safety Spot is an amazing company. There's a lot of amazing companies out there that we're looking at and talking to that are incredible. Just got to support them.
Yeah. Well, cool. Anything that we didn't cover today that you wanted to talk about before we go?
I'm
I feel like we covered a lot of bases.
we've got a lot of our bases, and if you ever ask me if I could talk more, boy, can I. But no, the reality is, I think things are moving in the right direction, slower than I think I would like, but it's fascinating. It's 2024. Cannabis is being rescheduled in the US. We have legal cannabis in Canada and in Germany and Australia. We have FDA that's about to come out with amazing licenses for actual drugs using psilocybin and MDMA. Like we're literally in the last decade, amazing things are happening and will continue to happen. We just got to keep pushing forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you mentioned earlier, the cocaine being like possibly a UN sanctioned, like I think it's crazy to think that that's ultimately what this has involved or what this has evolved into. It just as my last thought, because, with the drug war, aside from the fact that we should, have safe options to, acquire these drugs, one of the main complaints was just the policies, right? And honestly, like if I would have had it my way, like we would have just removed those policies, and then a little bit later on, we'd start talking about how to figure out licensing. But for like even in Illinois, we've not made it so that you can grow your own, and it just seems like a basic first step. And again, I'm not saying that licensing shouldn't happen right afterwards or anything else. I'm just saying first and foremost, you have to decriminalize the cultivation and possession of these substances entirely. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that's it just seems that like as we've moved forward, we continue to have to like work with the government, and it just feels weird. I mean, I know you have to go along to get along, but can we just acknowledge right now that it feels weird?
It's a weird partner to have, right?
Right, after everything they did too. And then it's like
It's
I
never,
keep saying they though. It's kind of we now because we can be in, you know what I mean? I don't mean to make the proverbial they an enemy.
But Cole, we're the enlightened ones, right? We get it. We just got to express ourselves in a proper way and get other people to get it and understand that even if they're not smoking weed or doing cocaine or ecstasy or
Yeah.
whatever, doesn't mean it's the worst thing in the world for the next person to be doing, because we don't know how everybody's dealing with their lives, and we should be there to support them. And let's figure out how to get along, and let's figure out actually now that I say I'm a little bit older, but our generation has that power right now, and just go out there and kind of assist and push the right policies to get into place so that we can have that, I think, better society.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I want to thank you again so much for your time today and just overall what you're doing. I think you're fighting the good fight. So thank you, Bill.
I appreciate it, Cole. Thank you. It was an honor to be on your show. Thank you.
Yeah, and hopefully this won't be the last time. We should reconnect in the future. And to folks that are listening, I hope you found as much value in this conversation as I did. As I said at the top of the show, you can find the link to safesupply.com in the podcast description if clicking on it is easier for you, or just go to safesupply.com. Either way, whatever works. We'll see you on the next episode of The Cole Memo. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.